You know, I'd honestly forgot that this was its own separate episode before I came back to watch it again, and I'm so glad of that, because I got to experience this episode over again for the first time, essentially. Like, this episode, Sick Mind, leads directly into the episode that follows it, and I remember that one a lot more strongly, but man, was this episode good, and a good example of what Prime does really well. Ratchet is, of course, researching stuff, cycling their scanner through different scanning frequencies in the hopes of discovering new stuff. And he just happens to come upon the Decepticon warship, which they can't usually scan for. Something is wrong with its EM cloak, and he just happened to find the right frequency to break through the cloak while it's damaged, and now they know where it is. Coincidentally, at the same time, though, this allows them to uncover the location of a cloaked Autobot ship which crashed on Earth. It's in distress, and so of course Optimus insists that they go and check it out first. He takes Ratchet because there could be injured, only for them to discover that it's a plague ship, which once carried Autobots infected by the Cybonic Plague, which Optimus is exposed to. Cybonic Plague is a biological weapon created by Megatron himself during the Great War, and there is no cure. Megatron is the only person who would know it, and as far as the Autobots know, he's dead. But they have the coordinates of the Nemesis. They can bridge right onto the ship in the hopes that maybe he left the cure somewhere in its databanks. This is super clever because it's a clear plot for the episode, a clear obstacle for the characters to overcome. It's a very episodic kind of setup, but it ties directly into past episodes and sets up for future episodes flawlessly, seamlessly. Obviously, this leads RC and Bumblebee, the two which go to scout out the Nemesis, to the revelation that Megatron is still alive on life support. RC wants to finish him off, of course, and honestly, I kind of wish that she had, just because it would have been a neat twist. But Ratchet has the idea to use Decepticon technology to counter Decepticon technology by using something that the Decepticons came up with, a cortical psychic patch. Bumblebee ends up volunteering because of course he does, and Ratchet sets up a visual link with him so that he'll be able to see whatever Bumblebee sees while inside Megatron's mind. But there's a danger to this. The Transformer who is doing the searching in the other mind has to physically leave their body with their mind, and that puts them at risk, especially since Megatron is at death's door. If he happens to die while Bumblebee is in his mind, Bumblebee's mind dies too. This stuff here with the cortical psychic patch is incredibly important to the lore of this continuity. It's setting up stuff that will pay off as far as 2 series away from this one. The most recent series, Transformers Cyberverse, which just started airing, makes use of this technology, revealing that characters with psychic abilities can use the patch to look into other people's minds without a risk themselves. But that is far from the only thing that this episode sets up. Inside Megatron's mind, Bumblebee discovers that Megatron has been imagining scenarios where he fights, defeats, and kills Optimus Prime over and over again. Megatron eventually discovers him and realizes that he's the real Bumblebee and deduces what's going on. So Bumblebee makes an executive decision and just straight up tells him what's happening. He reminds Megatron that he wants to defeat Optimus. That letting Optimus die of a plague would not give him the satisfaction of seeing Optimus die by his hand. So Megatron, not realizing that Ratchet can see everything that Bumblebee can see, briefly shows Bumblebee the cure, something that Bumblebee himself wouldn't be able to understand and internalize in just the second that he sees it, as proof that the cure exists so that Bumblebee will make a deal with him and get him out of this mind space somehow. But now Ratchet has the cure and they can pull Bumblebee out. It doesn't matter. They don't have to make the deal with Megatron, and of course, he's pissed off about this. At the same time, all of this is intersecting with a Decepticon plot by Starscream and Knockout to convince Soundwave that Megatron is beyond recovery so that they can unplug him, let him die, and seize permanent power for themselves. If this weren't the case, if this weren't going on right now, then RC and Bumblebee would have had pretty much as much time as they needed to get this done, but they don't. That's the entire reason why Bumblebee had to make that split decision, and it ended up being the right one. It ended up being pretty flawlessly the right decision, showing that Bumblebee has real leadership potential, real crunch time leadership potential, which sets up future arcs of his, where he actually becomes a viable candidate to replace Optimus as the leader of the Autobots. Back in the G1 cartoon, stuff like this used to go to the character of Hot Rod, but for a long time now, they've been giving traits of Hot Rod to Bumblebee, and this is kind of the culmination of that. This version of Bumblebee does end up being Optimus' successor after Optimus dies for a while, because he tends to do that from time to time. And even after Optimus comes back, he still follows Bumblebee's lead because he sees how good a leader he is. It's actually this arc for Bumblebee that's my main reason why I have a problem with the most current series. But I'll be talking about that soon in a different video, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much here. This also sets up stuff for Megatron, for his character. You get the sense in this episode that Megatron isn't really driven so much anymore by the political decisions that he made back when he first formed the Decepticons. That he feels so betrayed by Optimus for turning against him when he first formed the Decepticons that now his driving goal is to defeat his old friend. That the ethical and moral stuff that used to drive him isn't his driving force anymore, that it's this obsession. And that actually feeds into some character stuff that we get for him later on. We also get to see in this episode just how much Ratchet cares about Optimus, which is a character trait of his that remains consistent throughout the entire rest of the series. Like, I think it's safe to say that Ratchet loves Optimus. Not necessarily romantically or anything, but in that they're just incredibly close friends. Like, the relationship between the two of them that really starts to build starting with this episode really reminds me of the relationship between Jim Kirk and Leonard McCoy in the original Star Trek. These are two people who have known each other so long and have become so close that they can't imagine life without each other. So they get the cure and they pull Bumblebee out, but something doesn't seem quite right. Up until now, the Decepticon instruments have shown brain activity in Megatron, but now they're not seeing any. He's still alive, and this does give Soundwave motivation to keep him on life support longer than he probably would have if all this hadn't happened. Because, like, needless to say, the other Decepticons do discover the Autobots, and they have a bit of a confrontation during all of this. So not only is Megatron alive when he probably wouldn't have been, but now something seems different with his mind. And if you watch carefully, when they pulled Bumblebee out of his mind, Bumblebee turned into mist, signifying that his mind was leaving Megatron's. But then, right after that, the physical embodiment of Megatron inside his mind also turned to mist. This implies that somehow Megatron followed the cortical psychic patch back into Bumblebee's head. And that is confirmed at the end of the episode. Megatron has hitched a ride on Bumblebee, and while he doesn't seem in control of Bumblebee or anything, that doesn't mean he couldn't take control. And even if he couldn't take control, this is still obviously a bad thing. And that's where the episode ends. This was a really good, really solid, episodic episode with a one-off problem which started in the episode and was resolved by the end that the characters managed to solve. But it also so effortlessly tied into the lore of past episodes and set up stuff which will continue to pay off for years in the future. It's just such a fantastic little microcosm of everything that Prime does right. The character work here, the lore work here, it's all flawless and brilliant. The only real weakness here is that the kids weren't really made good use of. They were basically a cameo in the background, with Raph sometimes translating Bumblebee's speech for the other kids. This may not be one of the most exciting episodes of the show or one of the most dramatic episodes of the show, because obviously Optimus isn't going to die this early. I have the same problem with him being sick here that I had with him being trapped in the Arctic back in the Scrapwood episode. We know he's not going to die yet. That just wouldn't make sense, so there's no real dramatic tension there. But for the most part, structurally speaking, I think this is an example of a near-perfect Prime episode. All that said, though, guys, what did you think of this episode if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.